Take a look at this. That's the same house, before and after. That's the same table. It's not two tables spliced together in Photoshop. That's the same table. Someone's restored half of it. That's the same painting of this very happy woman. But the painting is what I want you to see, not her chipper expression. Like, you need a cookie. That's my kitchen after I made some eggs one morning, and before and after. No, not my kitchen. Could have been. And that's the same house too. Isn't that incredible? That's the same house. We've been doing this series now that we're finishing today called Restored. I am amazed at people who have the ability to restore cars and furniture and painting and statues and all these things that can be restored. This is an incredible gift. I have none of these talents, none of them. Can't restore any of these things. I can hire someone to restore them, but I can't actually restore them myself. But the reason we are doing this series is because our God has the ability not to restore paintings, cars and houses. He has the ability to restore human beings, and we all need that. Because the reality of your life is you are in this world going to get hurt so bad someday that you're going to feel a little chipped or a little broken, and some of you are going to be shattered by the pain in your life. It's just what's going to happen. The world that we live in has a way of hurting you. Some of you feel a little broken today. Good news. Our God restores human beings. And that's what this whole series has been about, is about the good news of how God can restore us and what he uses when he wants to restore us. And I said at the beginning, and I've said it every single week, Jesus was once asked, what's the most important commandment in the Bible? He said, this is it. This is the number one. And I said, this is what the series is based on. Jesus said, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. And so he said, it's like these four pieces make up who you really are. You have a heart, and you have a mind, and you have a soul, and you have physical strength. You have a body. And I've been asking you to imagine that each of these four areas has like a fuel gauge attached to it. And I've been saying, if you want God to restore you, you've got to monitor these four areas of your life. And you've got to know when the gauge is getting low. And then you've got to know what steps you have to take in order for God to begin to pour his life back into those areas of your life when you get deficient. And so I've saved my favorite for the last, the soul. You have a soul. The soul, in my opinion, of all of these, they're all important, absolutely important. You can't neglect any of them, but the soul is the most important because your soul is the connecting point between you and God. And if you will develop this area of your life, then you will experience God putting his power and peace and joy inside of you in circumstances where you would never have those things. Years ago, I read a book by an author named Francis Chan. Great author, and I don't remember which book it was in that I read it, but I read the story of this woman named Esther An Kim. Esther was living in Korea, unfortunately, during World War II when the Japanese invaded and conquered the nation. If you know your World War II history, you know that the Japanese were vicious conquerors. One of the things they did in Korea is they set up their little god shrines all over on every street corner, and they began to outlaw any other religious practice except their own. Well, Esther was a Christian. She knew the day was going to come when she wouldn't bow before their fake gods, and she was going to be thrown into a prison. So she, you got a couple options there. You can hide your faith, you can compromise your faith, but she's like, I'm not hiding and I'm not compromising. And so she began to prepare herself for prison. She began to eat moldy bread out of the trash because she knew that's what the prison rations would be. She memorized 100 chapters in the Bible because she knew she would have no Bible in prison. She memorized all of her favorite Christian songs because she knew she wouldn't have a hymnal in prison. And she prayed so much about it, she got her heart into the position where she wasn't even afraid of the torture that was about to come into her life because she believed in Jesus. Can you imagine this? She knew it was coming. She wasn't compromising. She poured so much time and energy into her soul that God really reshaped her for what was coming. And then it happened. The day came, they discovered her Christian faith. She was arrested, thrown into a prison cell. And incredibly, the story is so amazing. In that prison cell, she found joy and purpose. How many of you, if you were imprisoned in a situation like that, would describe your time in prison as joyful, purposeful, meaningful? She woke up every day and said, God, who do you want me to show your love to today? How many of you would wake up in prison, imprisoned under those circumstances, praying that prayer? But that's where her soul was. Right away, God answered her prayer. Shortly after she was in a cell, another woman was thrown into that cell. She had been convicted by the Japanese of murdering her husband, so she should be there. But she was hysterical and out of control, and she was thrown in the cell, and Esther just felt like God was prompting her. This is the woman I want you to serve. And so the first night, the woman had no shoes on, nothing on her feet, and it was a freezing cold cell. And so she kept that woman's feet warm all night long with her hands, even though that woman's feet were covered in ugh. She didn't care. She's like, I can serve this woman this way. For the next 3 days, even though the prison rations were small, she gave all of her food to this woman for 3 days so that the woman would have a little bit more. And the kindness and love of Esther was so overwhelming to this woman in prison that one day she said, what makes you so different here? And she got to tell her about Jesus, and this woman became a follower of Jesus in prison. And she wasn't the only one. The guards were so impacted by the love of God in this woman, Esther, that they wanted to know. And people were impacted by this woman whose light just shone out in this dark, dark place. That's the power of your soul. It can give you the ability to connect with God. Can you connect with God in a prison cell? Absolutely. You can have joy and peace in the middle of prison. The problem with this whole subject is most of us don't spend much time thinking about the condition of our soul. If I were to ask all of you, how much time did you spend this last week, the last 7 days, thinking about your soul? Or doing anything that was going to make your soul a little bit healthier? Chances are not too many of you could come up with a lot. So if I asked you, did you do anything to take care of your body this last week? Well, yeah, I did something there. Did you do anything to make yourself feel a little bit? Yeah, I watched this great show on Netflix. It was awesome, and I really liked it. Did you do anything to take care of your soul? Well, I was really kind of busy. We don't share the same priority about the condition of our soul that Jesus did. Jesus actually said this. Hold on. Where is the verse? Oh, I might have deleted it. Okay, sorry, it's not up there. Here, it's on my notes, not up here. Jesus said this in Matthew 16:16. What do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? And then he asked this question. Here's the question I'm asking you today. Is anything worth more than your soul? Okay. Do you believe that anything is worth more than your soul? Then the question, the follow-up is, what are you doing to care for your soul if you actually believe that? So my question is this, where's your spiritual gauge at today? If I were to ask you, is it on full? Some of you are like, oh my goodness, I feel so close to God. I can experience his love in my life. I just can't believe. I can't wait to get up and read my Bible. I just have such a cool experience with God right now. Some of you are like, that's where I'm at. Some of you be on the other side. It's like, prayer is meaningless to me. I don't even really pray because it just feels like it's bouncing off the ceiling. I don't really have any sense of God in my day-to-day experience. Your gauge is on empty. Now, there are some diagnostic things you can know. I used to teach this class for years and years and years and years and years, and I would ask the question when I was teaching this class, tell me about what emerges in the soul of a person, or what emerges in the life of a person who neglects their soul. And this was the list that they came up with in years, and this is just partial list. And my question is, do you see any of these words in your life today? Any anxiety or selfishness or greed or shame or apathy or anger or guilt, regret, fear, isolation, diminishing compassion, unhealthy drivenness, addiction. These are things that emerge in the life of a person who is neglecting their soul. Do you see any of these things in your life? So we're finishing this series today talking about the most important thing. We're talking about the condition of your soul, and what I want to show you today is how God can restore your soul. So would you grab your notes inside your program, take your notes out, grab a pen. This will be really, really important. Welcome to those of you watching on YouTube. So glad that you're tuning in. In the comment section below are the notes. Would you open those up and follow along? Let's go ahead and get started. Number one, this all begins when you start to understand the tremendous value of your soul. You've got to understand this. You've got to understand just how valuable your soul really is. You have to understand the tremendous value of your soul. And I'm going to tell you right now, as you're writing that down, this message is extremely frustrating to me. Extremely frustrating, because as I was prepping, I got really excited about everything I'm going to be talking about. I couldn't wait for today. I'm so excited to teach you this. But here's what's in the back of my mind is that you're going to walk out of here, and every message you're going to hear on TV, on the radio, from this moment on, from the time this message ends today, is going to tell you a different message, right? Every show is going to and every song, they are all going to say the same thing. They're all going to say, what's most important is sex. That's most important. And relationship. And it's all about money. And look at all the bling I got. And everything you're going to hear from this point on, after this message is over, is going to say, the soul doesn't really matter. What really matters is this. It's more. More. Every show, every song is about more possessions, more cheap fame, more pleasure, more power and control, more for me. This is what the world says is really important in our society today. We're buying right into it. Like the little gerbil on the wheel, just chasing after stuff that's not making us any better. As a matter of fact, years ago, I heard about this guy. His name is Howard Rutledge. He was a fighter pilot in Vietnam. He was shot down early on in the war. He was held in captivity for 7 years. In solitary confinement. If you ever read anything about Vietnam history and you know what these soldiers suffered, oh my goodness. In the book, he wrote a book after he survived, and he said, when he was just growing up here in America and he was married, and before he went off to war, he was married, his wife was a regular church attender, and she would always ask, hey, maybe you want to come with me? And he said she never nagged, she just asked. And he said, I was always too busy. I had fun that I was doing and work that I was doing. I got all this stuff done. I didn't have time for God and that stuff. And then he said this. When he was in the prison cell, he said, now I was isolated, and the sights and sounds and smells of death were all around me. My hunger for spiritual food soon outdid my hunger for a steak. Now I wanted to know about that part of me that will never die. Now I want to talk about God and Jesus, but in the prison camp, in solitary confinement, there was no pastor, no Bible, no hymn book, no community of believers to guide and sustain me. I had completely neglected my soul, this spiritual dimension of my life, and it took prison to show me how empty my life is without God. I wonder what it'll take you to realize just how important your soul really is. It's so interesting because, again, like I said, you're going to walk out here and nobody's going to say this again to you. But here's what's going to happen. Look at our society. Are we happier as we neglect our soul? The more we say that the invisible, eternal elements of this world don't matter, are we getting happier as a nation? Oh my goodness, we're so much happier, aren't we? We are the most depressed nation, the most medicated nation in the history of the world, even though we have more than any other nation's ever seen. We're more depressed. Our suicide rates are climbing rapidly. Our addiction rates are climbing rapidly. We're becoming a nation of alcoholics. We are not happier because we've said that our souls don't really matter all that much, and it's killing us. And Jesus says, is anything more valuable than your soul? So why does he say it's so important? Well, a couple of things. On your notes, write this down first. Your soul is eternal. Your body isn't eternal. Some of you are just happy your body is here today. So your body isn't eternal, but your soul is eternal. Things that last are things that are valuable, and your soul lasts forever. Jesus said, don't be afraid of those who want to kill your body. They can't touch your soul. Fear only God, who can destroy both soul and body in hell. He says what matters most is not the material world, not what you have in your savings account, not what you have in your checking account, not what you have in your home, all of that stuff. It's all not going to last. Your soul lasts forever. You need to give priority and time and attention to the things that are going to last. And then the second thing, and this is really important, a healthy soul is actually the key to life that you want. Everything that you're watching on TV, everything you're hearing on the music, they're like this, it's all, the message is, once I have the girl, then I'll be happy and content. Once I have the money, then I'll be happy and content. Once I have this, and they keep defining it like the gerbil on the wheel, more and more and more and more, and we're never happy and we're never content. And the reality is, the key to the life that we all want is found in what God offers us. Not in any possession or anything we could accumulate in this world. Jesus put it this way. He said, take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you. Because I'm humble and gentle at heart, and you will find Look at this last phrase. Matter of fact, if you have your pen and you have your notes, would you underline these last 4 words? Rest for your souls. So here's my question for you. Here's my question for you. How many people do you know right now who live in this chaotic, out of control world that we live in, who are sincerely at rest in their soul? You would say they're so content. They have so much peace in a world that's this out of control. It's what he offers. This is what he's offering us. The key to the life that we want is actually found in him. Matter of fact, I showed you what emerges in the life of a person who neglects their soul. Here's what emerges in the life of a person who takes their soul, who pays attention to their soul. Do you want anything on this list? Anything on that list stand out to you? Is like, oh man, I could use a little more of that. These are the things that emerge in the soul, in the life of a person who pays attention to their soul and makes their soul healthy. So, that's how important your soul is. So, how do we make sure that our soul is headed in the right direction? Well, you need to understand this. Number 2, connecting with God is what's going to restore your soul. I wish I could say connecting with your couch is what's going to restore your soul, or connecting with, TV is going to restore your soul, but it can't. Connecting with your checkings account is going to restore your soul? No. Jesus, if you asked me, and I say it all the time, I got a lot of favorite verses. There are a lot of verses in the Bible that are like, oh, this is one of my favorites, this is one of my favorites, this is one of my favorites. But if you ask me what my absolute favorite verses in the Bible are, they are John chapter 15. They're right here. Jesus said, remain in me, and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it's severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. Yeah, I am the vine, you're the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. From apart from me, you can do nothing. Doesn't that describe the world that we live in? A whole lot of activity and not a lot of results. So here's the imagery. In Jesus, in Jesus' day, when he was teaching this, there were vineyards all over Israel. And so maybe he was standing right by a vineyard as he was teaching the people that were his disciples that day. And maybe he took a branch in his hands as he said these words. Look at this. This is the imagery of what he's saying. Look how beautiful those are. Man, I want to eat some of those. So he's saying, look at this. This is what life is like. You're a branch. I'm the vine. The branch can't do anything on its own. If I took that branch off, you know what happens. It dies because it's no longer receiving from the vine what it needs to be healthy. The branch doesn't have a lot of effort to do. This is what we mess up all the time in Christianity. We get this idea that I've got to work more, I've got to do more. No, we got to remain more. We got to remain connected to God more. And then he says the result of that will be fruit in your life. Now, there are 2 kinds of fruit that God is offering to give you. First is external fruit, where you fulfill God's purpose for your life, and he uses you to make a difference. Some people have no idea about what that sentence actually means in America today because it is all entirely about them. The selfish life is promoted and celebrated in America like never before, and it's crippling us. It does nothing positive. I see some of these people on YouTube that have, I don't know how many thousands or hundreds of thousands of followers, and they look like the most miserable people on the planet. Who cares? You've made it all about yourself. It's not what you're here for. You are here put on earth by God to fulfill his purpose for you, and there is nothing like the joy that comes in your life when you know that God just used you. That's the first element of fruit that he wants to produce. He said, just remain in me, and you will be used by me to impact the world around you. But then that other fruit is this internal fruit we already talked about. This is where you get to experience his peace and love and joy and contentment and rest. And so the key on your notes is simply this. Would you write this down? My primary responsibility then is simply to remain connected to God. Jesus is the vine, we're the branches. Branches don't bear fruit. They remain connected to the vine, and the vine pours everything into them that they need. The relationship with God is the primary responsibility. Now, you want to see what he's offering you? Then you just read the New Testament. You read verses like this. Do you know anything about this? Peter wrote and said, we rejoice with joy that is inexpressible. Let me ask you this. In your lifetime, have you ever known joy that was so overwhelming for you, you couldn't even put it into words? This is what he's offering us. It's life that's real life. It's life that's real life if we just remain in him. He's the vine, we're the branches, and remaining in him is the key. So here's what I've said so far. Your soul is the most important thing you have. The most important thing you have, it's eternal. And it's really the key to the good life. And in order for you to experience the life God wants, you've got to take that soul and connect it to Jesus. And if you just remain in him, then he'll give you everything you want. He'll change your impact in this world, and he'll change you. So that means that number 3 is the most important thing I'm going to say to you. You need to learn how to develop these connection habits so that the branches remain connected to the vine. So you remain connected to God. And this is what I want you to really hear me say today. I was talking to a friend recently, and she was on a very long car ride coming back, and all of a sudden her phone rang, and she was told something that hurt her so bad. It was just crushing to her. And so my friend called me and told me what had just happened, and I'm like, oh no, I'm so sorry. This is just not what you needed to hear. I'm so sorry. And so I had to hang up and call my friend back, and so it was a little bit before I could call my friend back. I called my friend back, and my friend sounded completely different on the phone. The anxiety and the pain that had been in her voice just 15 minutes earlier was gone. And there was, joy inside of her voice. Like, what just happened? Well, she said, after she hung up with me, she just started talking to God. And she just started pouring out her pain to him, and she said, God, I just need a sign. I just need a sign. And she was asking for a sign that things would be okay, that things could turn around. 10 seconds later, she drove by a sign. 10 seconds. And so by the time I got back on the phone with her, she's like, guess what just happened? And she told me, and we laughed together, and we both took it the same way. It was just, he said, God, I need a sign. First off, you don't drive by many billboards that's just like Jesus. She drove by, and we both talked about it. It's like God was saying, I got this. I got this. I'm with you. You don't have to figure this all out right now. I'm with you. Do you know that that's exactly how God wants to interact with you every single day? Look what Jesus said. For all the really good, godly people who ask, they will receive. All of you who live really perfect Christian lives and you seek, then you're going to find. And all of you who never make a mistake and you keep knocking on that door is going to be open for you. That's how we read it, right? That's not what it says, is it? You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be flawless. You don't have to be super spiritual and super godly. You just got to turn to him. That's all you got to do. And everyone who turns to him and says, hey, God, I need a sign, you receive. And everyone who turns to him and says, I need you, I'm seeking the way forward because I don't know. And everyone who seeks, they find. And everyone who knocks, God, here's my need. And I'm just knocking at the door until you come. That's the imagery he's playing on. That door is open for that person. This is what he's offering you. It is a supernatural life where you get to experience God on a regular basis. When was the last time you had an experience with God like that? That story should be common in our lives because he's promised it. So let me talk about connection habits that will make it so that you experience more and more of God in your life. First one, letter A on your notes, is Bible reading. You got to read your Bible. I cannot say that enough. If nothing else, download the program YouVersion on your phone and set it up so that you get Bible verses sent to you every single day, and at least read one. When I was a new Christian, I was 13 years old, 14 years old when I became a follower of Jesus, and somebody told me right away, if you read 3 or 4 chapters a day, you can read through the Bible in a year. And so I'm like, okay. So I picked up my Bible, I had it right by my bed, and every night before I'd go to bed, I would read 3 or 4 chapters. So many times, I didn't understand anything I was reading. And then there were times that it was, oh my goodness, I can't believe I just read that. I didn't know that. But it was the discipline of doing it every single day for years and years and years and years and years that began to really impact my life. And I'm not asking you to do 3 or 4 chapters a day. I'm just asking you to read a verse a day. But eventually you got to move beyond just a verse a day. But I'll be happy if you just start with a verse a day, because here's what eventually is going to happen to you. Okay? Let me explain what God does in my life regularly, because I have experiences with God through the Bible constantly. Last year, rough year. One day I sat down. My habit is every morning, get up and get ready for work, and then I sit down with my Bible, and I read, and then I pray. If you've heard me teach, you know that I say consistently there is one book when you're in pain that you need to go to. One book. Does anyone know what that book is? Psalms. I say it over and over and over again because I want you to know this, because the next time your life falls apart or you're broken or you're damaged, you need to know where to go. It's the biggest book right in the middle, Psalms. And it starts with P, so it looks like Psalms. Ignore the P, it's silent. It's Psalms. Go there, start reading, and over go. I cannot tell you how much God met me in that book. So let me give you an example. Last year, I was in so much pain at one point, and I sat down one morning, and I opened up my Bible to Psalm 77. I just started reading randomly. And the opening chapters of Psalm 77 the opening verses aren't very positive. Here's what he was saying in the first 10 verses. By the way, I want you to, as we look at this list, I want you to ask, have you ever felt any of these things? Maybe some of you feel them today. He was said to God, this is his prayer to God, I am too distressed even to pray. And then here's what's in his head. Will God never be kind to me again? Has the Lord rejected me forever? You ever felt that way? Is his unfailing love gone forever? Ever been in so much pain, that's what you thought? Have his promises permanently failed? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he slammed the door in his compassion toward me? And I said this, here's the story in his head. This is my fate. The Most High has turned his hand against me. Have you ever had that story in your head? God isn't for me. He's against me. Some of you have suffered so much at some point in your life that you haven't wondered about that. It's been the story in your mind. So I'm reading these first 10 verses. I relate to a lot of those things. They were in my head at certain points. And I'm like, this chapter sucks. I mean, come on. I'm looking for some hope and meaning in the middle of this. And then I got to verse 11. By the way, this is we talk about this all the time. And this is a great point. Some of you are in the middle of something painful, so you see or hear, experience something, and you tell a story. His story was right there in the last one. God has turned his hand against me. Now, what you feel is always based on the stories you're telling yourself in your head. If you tell yourself the story, God has turned his hand against me, how are you going to feel? You're going to feel hopeless, and you're going to feel despair, and you're going to feel discouraged. Your feelings are always rooted in the stories that you tell yourself. The good news is, we say it all the time, you get to change the story like you change the channel. And in verse 11, he changes the story. He said, but then I recalled all you have done, O Lord. I remember your wonderful deeds of long ago. They're constantly in my thoughts. I can't stop thinking about your mighty works. And then in the next verse, he praises God, and then he goes on to list all the incredible things God has done that he has heard about or witnessed himself. And by the end of the chapter, everything has changed. His attitude has gone from discouragement to hope. And so I'm sitting there reading this, and it's like, oh my goodness, I got to do this. So I always say that if something strikes you in the Bible, like that struck me, you have to have a notebook or a laptop or computer, and you write it down. So here's what struck me. Here's why it struck me. What do I need to do? And so I made a list that day. This is part of my list. I'm not going to read all this to you, but I wrote this on that day. I said, I need to do this. I need to recall how he has worked for me in the past. And I started listing all the ways that God has worked in my life. And the list grew so long. And as it grew, my gratitude for God increased, and my fear diminished, and hope came in. I said, I can choose what I put in my mind. I can recall the good things he's done for me in the past. And I had an incredible experience with God that day. That's what he will do if you will give him the chance to speak to you through this book. The only question is, are you going to do it? It's not that our God doesn't want to do this in your heart and your mind. He wants to every single day. He'll speak to you if you'll let him. And that's the first habit. The second connection habit that is just so essential is prayer. This is why my friend had that encounter with God that day. I know somebody's like, that's just coincidence. I'm telling you, when you pray, coincidences happen. They will always happen when you pray. So I wanted to talk about prayer in a little different way. Flip your notes over in the back. I wanted to talk about, there are 3 common dangers to avoid when you're praying. I want to encourage you to get a notebook and write down your prayer requests. And when you ask God for something, put a date by it so that when he answers it, you can put the date when he answered it. And your faith will grow as he does this for you. But there are some dangers to avoid when praying, things I've learned along the way, traps you fall into. The first trap is legalism, or checking it off a list. So I have a note. I have about 3 pages of things that I typically pray through. So, man, you do that every single day, you can just view it as a list to check off. I mean, that's how I am. I'm a list maker anyway. I like my list. I will oftentimes add things to my list to check them off after I've done them, just to make sure I get credit in my own head for what I've done. So I get it, I'm a list maker. Some of you are list makers too, some of you don't like lists. Okay, fine. We're all different personality-wise. So I had to watch out for this. It's like, this isn't a list. It's not a checklist. Okay, I'm done with the God thing. I can move on with the rest of my day. So the way I avoid that is this. You start with the right focus. This is the prayer. This is the sentence I start every single prayer time with God with. I say, God, this isn't a task for me to complete today. This is a relationship with you that I want to build. That's why I'm talking to you right now. And every single day, that gets me focused on the right thing. This isn't a list that I'm about to be done with, or I can move on with the God stuff. Nope. This is a relationship with a real God who loves me. So I start with the right focus. So be careful. Don't just make a list and zip through it each day. Polite words is the second trap you can fall into, where you're just inauthentic. God, I want to pray about princesses and ponytails and puppy dogs, and you're talking about things that we don't really actually care about. And we do this all the time in church. We'll listen to people pray, especially when they're beginners. Like, we say polite prayers to God. Did you not hear what that guy said to God in Psalm 77? I feel like you've turned your hand against me. Some of you actually think that today. That is the story in your head. You would never think to say it to God. And I'm telling you right now, until you start saying to God what's honestly in your heart, you will never encounter him. Until you get to that point of full authenticity with God, where you can say, God, I am so upset about the state of this relationship that I don't even want to talk to you right now. I'm so mad that I've asked for this prayer request for 2 years and you haven't done a thing that I can see, and I don't even want to ask again. See, until you get that level of honesty, you won't encounter God. If you're praying safe little prayers that generate no emotion inside of you, you are praying wrong. Over and over again, if you want to do an interesting search, go search for the phrase cried out in the Bible. It's when people cry out to God that they experience God. It's like, I'm at the end. I can't figure this out. I have no more solutions. I give up, God. And then God goes, finally, now you get me. So you need to understand that's how this works. If you're just going to pray safe little prayers, don't expect your prayers to be anything other than just bouncing off the ceiling. You got to tell them what's actually in your heart about these things you're praying about. Be honest. Tell them everything. The third one is using God to get what you want. Oh, I did this wrong for so many years. This one is painful to me. So I had this long list. I prayed for years and years about some of these things. And one day I found myself getting so frustrated because there's a verse in the New Testament where it says, if you seek him, he will reward you. And so I looked at that verse. I'm like, all right, I'm going to seek you every day, God. I'm coming with my prayer list because you're going to give me the reward. And I was getting more and more mad because he wasn't doing all these things he said, you promised this. You told me this. What's the deal? You're not giving me what the reward is. And finally, I was getting so frustrated with God, I didn't want to pray anymore. And all of a sudden, one day, I realized what I was doing wrong. For me, the reward was what God could give me. The reward was more in my savings account and more success in my career and more. And all of a sudden I realized the mistake I was making, why it was not working, is because I had made the things God could give me the treasure in this world rather than God himself being the reward. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, so here's what I do though. This will hopefully clear this up. Every day in my notebook, I have this section where I pray this. I hold up my hands, both of them, and I say, God, if you were to give me everything I want today, in my left hand, I always hold up my left hand, I go, if you were to give me everything, I think about, a fully stocked emergency fund and a job that's really meaningful and fulfilling for me and all my kids doing great, earning 6 figures and emotionally healthy. I mean, everything you want, everything. Big house and brand new cars, everything, God. If you were to offer me absolutely everything in my heart that I would ever want, or the opportunity to know you better. And I say, I let go of all of this. If only I could know you. You're the treasure in this world, not the stuff you can give me. And when I do that right, that's when everything changes in my heart. And by the way, that's what Jesus said in Matthew when he said, if you seek me first, then you get everything else. It only works when he's the treasure. He's what you want more than anything else. Now, sometimes I say, God, I may reluctantly let those things go, right? And that's okay. I'm not surprising him by saying that. That's just where your heart is at. Some days it's harder to let those things go because something pressing is in your mind. So you've got to get to that point where you can do that. So those are some things. So it's about reading your Bible so he can talk to you. It's about praying so you can talk to him. And then the third essential habit for you to connect with him is you have to serve. You will never, ever experience what God has for you until you understand that your primary identity as a follower of Jesus is you are a servant. You will never experience what he wants in your soul till you become a servant. That's why we give you serving opportunities as a church, because we have to serve each other. That's why we present serving opportunities in the community, like this supper that's coming up in October, where you can come and serve people, and the food that you serve people is going to go to this cause, and we're going to be able to serve other people. That's why these things are essential, not optional. They are essential, not optional. This is the element that God is going to use to change your soul. So let me give you an example of this. Recently I was reading in my Bible and I came to this little book called Titus, small little book in the New Testament. Paul was writing to this young pastor, his name was Titus, and he was saying, here's what I want you to teach your church. And I was so struck by this. So I'm going to show you the verses and show you what I noticed. And they're going to go backwards. So it's only 3 chapters long. So Titus 3:14, he said, here's what I want you to teach them. Our people must learn to do good by meeting the urgent needs of others. So he said, if he was writing to me, he said, Brian, stand up in front of the church and tell them, hey, here's what we have to do. We have to learn how to meet the urgent needs of the people around us. We need to learn to do good by meeting the urgent needs of the people around us. But then a few verses before that I noticed, so that all who trust in God, here's what he said, they will devote themselves to doing good. And then, a few verses before that, Jesus gave his life to free us and to make us his very own people, totally committed to doing good deeds. Do you notice what I see in those verses? Do you notice the repeated phrase? Learn to do good, devote yourself to doing good, be totally committed to doing good. Is that you? What level are you at? Some of you are just learning to do good. You're just beginning to start to serve a little bit here and there when it's convenient for you. When you have a little time. Serving is optional. Some of you, you're at a deeper level. You are devoting yourself to doing good. You serve regularly. Some of you are at the last level where you are a servant. You are totally committed to doing good deeds. And what you need to understand, what these verses teach, what the New Testament teaches, is that that serving is not optional. If you say that you want to follow Jesus, you have to get to that third level where you are totally committed to doing good. Because Jesus said, every time you serve another human being, you serve him. Every time you do anything good for another human being, he takes it personally, and he will thank you on the day you see him if you will live your life this way. It's why our souls, in the New Testament says, you keep your spiritual passion alive, your soul, you want that gauge to go up by serving the Lord, he says. Keep your spiritual passion by serving the Lord. So I was reminded of that recently with something that happened here in our community. So this is Mazamani. We all heard about the flooding that's gone on, the tremendous damage, how much people lost. We were all watching the news. We were all hearing the reports. A member of our church said, we got to do something. We got to do something. So they contacted the leader of the church, and the next thing I know, an email's going out and saying, hey, we want you to think about bringing some supplies. And it was really short turnaround time. It's like, we want, I don't think it was even 24 hours. It's like, we want, if you can bring these things, we'll bring them here. And plus we're going to gather, we're going to make sandwiches. And the next thing I know, we're getting an email telling what this little church did. And this is what it was. All of that, 265 sandwiches, and then they dropped it off at the Red Cross, and they were so grateful. And then I saw the pictures, and I was so deeply moved. Here's a picture of them just making all the sandwiches, but look at this. That's what we did. And somebody got a case of water, because they can't drink their water right now. And they were so grateful. For those of you who brought water that day, in your future, you're going to stand in front of Jesus, and he's going to say, you know what, thank you so much, because I was so thirsty, and you gave me water. And he's going to say, well, when did I ever see you thirsty and give it to you? And he'll say, what you did for the least of these, you did for me. He takes every act of serving personally. If you want your soul lit on fire and that gauge full, serving can't be optional. You have to be totally committed to doing good. And as I was, part of this one, I was so impacted by it and reminded again how important this is. Now, those are the 3 habits that I would really emphasize today. If you want to begin, here's why this is so important, why I did this message, okay? Most of you know that it was almost 2 years ago, August 7th, that my life was shattered. I know the exact day, I know the exact sentence that broke me. I heard something on that day that hurt me so deeply that I had an emotional breakdown. I didn't know I was having an emotional breakdown. Never had one before. Hope to never have one again. But in that overwhelming pain, when my life fell apart, I encountered things I've never encountered before. To be very honest with you, I wanted to kill myself. I was suddenly a single parent with 2 kids at home. I can remember the darkness of those days. The world looked dark, like there was no light left. If not for the fact that I had 2 kids at home, I do not know what choice I would have made. I was so overwhelmed. I wanted to kill myself. So I knew I couldn't sustain that. I knew that my daughters needed me, and so I went to the doctor. The doctor wanted to hospitalize me, but again, I'm like, who takes care of my kids? So I let them put me on, I asked for medication. Some of you are really reluctant to take medication. What are you thinking? I wanted to ask that. I don't understand that at all. That makes no sense to me. You think your brain can't break down? Only the rest of your body? I'm sorry, your brain's part of your body. It can break down, and God has given us these medical advances, like, use them. For 10 days, that medicine made me sleep all night long and take 5 naps a day, all day long. I just barely could stay awake. At the end of 10 days and sleeping that much, I felt that much better. And I thought, okay, I've been shattered by something I never, ever knew could hurt me like this. So I thought, it's time for God to restore me. And I knew all these things I've taught you, all of them, that I have a heart and a mind and a body and a soul. And the only way back was for those gauges to get something in them, because they were all on empty. And so I stopped taking the medicine and replaced it with what I've talked to you about in this series. If you're just going to stop taking the medicine and not do these things, don't do that. And I began to do all the things I've talked about, taking care of my body, my heart, my mind, but this was the one that was most important. Every day I got up, sat in my chair, first thing, and I would open my Bible, and God shouted to me through the pages of the book of Psalms. I filled notebooks with things he was saying to me. I can specifically remember times that I would wake up and I didn't want to be alive, and I would open my Bible to the exact phrase I needed to read to even function that day. And God would fill me with his peace and fill me with hope. And now here I stand in front of all you 2 years later. And my cages are so strong. And people comment all the time about, you just seem so happy. You know why? Because our God is a restoring God. Our God can restore your soul because he's done it for me. Let me have you bow your heads. Some of you are followers of Jesus, and you look at these habits, these connection habits, and you know that there's some work you need to do in some of these areas, and I would say it is never too late to start. These have been habits in my life for 35 years. They will always be habits in my life. I will never stop them. Some of you aren't doing anything with your Bible, just start. Get that program and just start. Let God speak to his words of hope and peace to you every day. Some of you, it's time to do a little bit more than that. You can read 3 or 4 chapters a night. Just have the Bible by your bed, and every night before you go to bed, instead of watching TV or reading something else, just pick up your Bible and just read 3 or 4 chapters. Start in the book of Matthew, the New Testament. Just let Jesus speak to you. Some of you, it's time to do more with prayer. You've tried prayer, it doesn't really work for you, and maybe you're making some of these mistakes I talked about. Start with the right focus. God, it's about you and a relationship with you, not a list. And be honest with him. Don't lie to him. Tell him everything you're feeling. And then make sure he's first. It's about you, God. You're the treasure. Knowing you's the treasure, because my soul connected to you, I have everything I need and want. Some of you are just exploring your faith here. I hope you've got the message. This is a real God, and he is powerful and loving. And he doesn't want you just to know about him. He wants you to know him. And Jesus came so that you could know him today. 2,000 years ago, Jesus died on the cross to pay for everything I've done that's wrong and you've done that's wrong. And then Jesus rose again, and he offers every human being a real relationship with God if you take it from his hand. And it's simply an act of faith. You say something like this, pray these words in your heart to God today. He'll hear you. Say, Jesus, I'm turning to you today. I am far from perfect. But I heard that you died on the cross for me, so would you please forgive me? Would you please come and make your home inside of me? I want a real relationship with you. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, can I ask you all to take your program again as we finish? Inside is a little card. And would you take the card out, and then some of you just prayed and you asked Jesus to forgive you. Would you check the card? Is the card in there? It's not in mine today. So is the card? Okay, it is good. So even if you're a regular tender, we ask you to fill this out every week. Just put your name down if you're a regular tender. But then let us know if you prayed and asked Jesus to forgive you. Check that box. If you want to, if you recommitted your life, let us know. If there's something you want us to pray for, we have a team of people to pray for you. Then think about signing up on one of those sign-up sheets on the back table. We'll talk more about this in the next series. And again, next week, cannot wait to talk to you about this. I cannot emphasize enough how exciting and meaningful and fun this series is going to be that we're starting. So if you can think of somebody who needs to come on out and join us for the movie on Wednesday, and then think about who you can invite with you next Sunday, and we'll see what God does through all of us, okay? Thanks for coming. Hope you have a great week.